You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. And on today's episode of the podcast, we're going to be doing our series preview of the T20 and ODI series between South Africa and Australia, which is not far away for Australia's tour of South Africa. So we're going to be previewing both series today, talking about both teams in terms of the preparation they'll be doing for the T20 World Cup in India in a couple of months' time, and also players pushing their case to be a part of the World Cup squads for their respected countries. Australia will have a different leader for this T20 and ODI series against South Africa. Mitchell Marsh will be captain. It'll be interesting to see how he goes as skipper of the T20 and ODI side. He could be the permanent skipper of both teams going forward into the future. So we've got lots to talk about, lots to discuss in this episode of the podcast today. So let's get into it. And first of all, let's have a look at the series fixtures for the T20 and ODI series between South Africa and Australia. We've got 3 T20 internationals and 5 ODIs for the tour of South Africa for Australia. We'll start with the T20s first of all. 3 of them will be played in Kingsmead, which is in Durban. The first T20 will be on August the 31st, the second T20 on 2nd of September. The third and final T20 will be on the 3rd of September. And then a short turnaround before the ODI series starts. And then 5 ODIs. The first one will be played at the Mongwe Oval. They'll be on the 7th of September. The second ODI will be played at the Mongwe Oval on the 9th of September. The third ODI will be played at JB Marks Oval. That'll be the 12th of September. The fourth ODI will be played at Supersport Park in Centurion, which will be at the 15th of September. And the fifth and final ODI will be played at the Wanderers. And that will be on the 17th of September to round out the tour for Australia before they go on to India for the World Cup and also for an ODI series before the World Cup against India. So that's the series fixture for both the T20 and the ODIs series. Let's have a look at some of the stats between South Africa and Australia in T20 cricket. First of all, head-to-head in T20s overall, South Africa 8, Australia 14. Both teams' records in South Africa in T20 cricket. South Africa 6, Australia 7. Leading run scorer is David Warner with 471. Leading wicket taker is Pat Cummins with 13. Most dismissals, Ben Dunk and Quinton de Kock with 6. Most catches, David Miller with 12. Most matches, JP Duminy, David Miller, David Warner with 15. And the first T20 that South Africa and Australia played was back in 2006. Let's have a look at the ODI stats between South Africa and Australia over the years. Head-to-head in ODIs overall, South Africa lead 51-48 to Australia. Both teams' record in South Africa and ODIs, South Africa 25, Australia 20. Leading run scorer, no surprise, Ricky Ponting with 1,879 runs. Leading wicket taker is Shane Warne with 60. Most dismissals is Adam Gilchrist with 69. Most catches is Jonty Rhodes with 25. Most matches is Jonty Rhodes with 55 matches to his name. And the first ODI that the teams played was back in 1992. And those are some of the ODI stats between South Africa and Australia. Now, let's talk about both teams. Let's talk about their T20 and ODI squads for this series in South Africa, this tour. And let's talk about how they'll go about things in this, in the two series, I should say. First of all, let's start with South Africa and talk about their T20 and ODI squads. But first of all, let's talk about their T20 squad. And the squad they've selected for the T20 series is Aidan Markram, Temba Bavuma, Matthew Breckie, Devolt Brevis, Gerald Coetzee, Donovan Ferreira, Bjorn Fontaine, Reza, Hendricks, Marco Janssen, Mangala, Maharaj, Ngidi, Shamsi, Stubbs, Williams, and Van der Dussen. So that's South Africa's T20 squad that they've selected for the series against Australia. Now, for South Africa, they've announced some uncapped players in this T20 squad, some new faces, and an opportunity for these new players to get into T20 cricket internationally. Deralt Brevis, he's been touted as the next AB de Villiers. Played in the IPL recently, played for the Mumbai Indians. We remember the name of Brevis because he scored that incredible innings in a domestic T20 match in South Africa where he scored 162 off 57 balls, which was an incredible display of power hitting. So he's in the squad. He's in the South African team for the first time. Also, wicketkeeper batter Donovan Ferreira is also in the squad. Fast bowler Gerald Coetzee and batter Matthew Brekke. All of them are uncapped players, and it's an opportunity for them to showcase their skills for South Africa in the T20 format. According to Rob Walter, the limited overs coach for South Africa, he said, we're looking for opportunities to grow our base of players, and the T20 series against Australia is a perfect chance to give some of the rising cricketers in the country the chance to show us what they're capable of. And it's a pretty good thing whenever you have young players come into a squad. They always bring that energy of youth, excitement. So South Africa trying different players out. Obviously, no Quinton de Kock, no Klaasen, no Miller, no Nokia or Rabada. All of them have been rested for the T20s, but will play in the ODI series. So an opportunity for those players I mentioned, the uncapped players for South Africa to see what they can do in T20 cricket. And also for South Africa, sort of like with Australia, as we will discuss with Australia in just a moment, sort of picking players, new different players for the T20 World Cup next year in the USA and the Caribbean. An opportunity to try different players out and see what they can do in the T20 format. We know with South Africa in the last T20 World Cup in Australia, they got knocked out by the Netherlands. They couldn't qualify for the semi-finals, and that was a very disappointing defeat. So South Africa will be looking to try and fix the problems they have in T20 cricket and try and different players out. But you have a look at their squad. They've got some good players. Markram, you've got Hendricks, who's done well over the years. You've got Brevis, who's done well, as we know. Janssen, Ngidi, to name a few. Even Shamsi's done well. So they've all done well in T20 cricket. They've all played good in franchise cricket, especially in the IPL. So they've got that experience. So it'll be interesting to see how South Africa go about things against Australia in this T20 series. Let's talk about the one-day squad and have a look at their one-day squad, South Africa, what they've selected for this series against Australia. So their ODI squad is Bavuma, Brevis, Coetzee, de Kock, Fontaine, Hendricks, Janssen, Klaasen, Mangala, Maharaj, Markram, Miller, Ngidi, Nokia, Shamsi, Parnell, Rabada, Stubbs, and Van der Dussen rounds out the ODI squad. Now for South Africa, the squad that they've selected here for this series against Australia, you would think that probably most of these players will probably feature for them in the World Cup. It's quite a big squad. They will be cut down to 15 because you're only allowed to have 15 players for a Cricket World Cup squad. So for some of these players, it's an opportunity for them to prove their case to the selectors that they should be in the World Cup squad. As we know, South Africa just barely qualified for the World Cup. They didn't have to play in the qualifiers in Zimbabwe. So they barely made it into the cutoff for the World Cup in terms of qualification. It just shows where South Africa are at as a one-day team at the moment. They're a bit inconsistent, up and down. They've struggled at times over the last 4 years to qualify for the World Cup, but they made it. So they get an opportunity to qualify and play in the World Cup in a couple of months' time in India. It's a good test for South Africa. I think in this ODI series against Australia, it's a good test for them to test themselves against the best team in the world in Australia. They've got some good players, Australia, as we will discuss in just a moment. it's a good opportunity for most of these players in South Africa's ODI squad to show what they can do. It'll be a good test for South Africa. I think for South Africa, it'll be a good indication of where they're at as a team heading into the World Cup and what they need to do to fix the problems that they may have in their team. But they've got some good players. De Kock, Miller, Klaassen, Markram. You've got Brevis, who's hasn't played international yet for South Africa. You've got Nokia, Rabada, Janssen. Parnell's experienced, and so is Shamsi. So they've got some good batters and bowlers in the squad. So as I mentioned, it's going to be a good test for South Africa in terms of how they shape up for the World Cup and how they go against an Australian team that doesn't have Cummins and Smith and Stark. But that's beside the point. The point is for South Africa is that can they play some good cricket in this series? That will be the goal for South Africa, is that, yes, we want to win the series because as you do when you play a bilateral series, you want to win. But if they don't win the series, they will take a lot of learnings out of this series against Australia, which is the important thing, to learn and to reflect. And for South Africa, they will want to do well in the World Cup. We know the history for South Africa in World Cups over the years. It hasn't gone to plan. So they'll be hoping this time around that things go in their direction. But we shall see. So their T20 squad and ODI squad, they've got some good players. They've got some talented players. It's just whether or not South Africa can pull a performance together to ensure that they have some success in both the T20 and ODI series. We shall see, but they do have some exciting players, and let's hope we see the best of their players in this T20 and ODI series against Australia. So that's South Africa. Let's talk about Australia and their T20 and ODI squads. We'll start with the T20 squad for Australia. The squad they've selected is Marsh, Abbott, Behrendorff, David, Ellis, Hardy, Head, Inglis, Johnson, Maxwell, Short, Stornis, Turner, and Sampa. And that's the T20 squad that Australia selected. Australia's T20 squad is a pretty good squad that they've selected. Now, obviously, Australia had to make some changes ahead of this tour of South Africa. Obviously, Cummins, Smith, and Stark are all injured. Cummins has a wrist injury. Smith has a tendon injury in his wrist that he picked up in the Ashes. Mitchell Stark has some soreness around the groin. That's understandable. He bowled a lot of overs in the recent Ashes series. He played 4 test matches on the trot. So all of them are being rested as a precaution. So they had to make some changes to the T20 and the ODI squad. Ashton Turner is in the squad for Steve Smith for the T20s. And obviously Marnus Labuschagne and Spencer Johnson are in for the ODIs. With that being said, the T20 squad, they've got some new faces. Matt Short, Spencer Johnson, Aaron Hardy. Some new faces in the T20 squad for Australia, which is just exciting. And it's also an indication that Australia are thinking beyond the T20 World Cup next year and into the future. Because obviously the Australian team will go under some transition. The senior players like Smith, Warner, maybe Hazelwood and Stark will probably not be around in the next few years. So this T20 squad is a different squad. It's a new look squad. It's got a new captain in Mitchell Marsh. He'll be captaining for the first time at an international level. So with that being said, the new faces have done well. Matt Short, for example, he scored 458 runs in this year's BBL for the Adelaide Strikers, did pretty well. He scored 493 runs in BBL 11, and he backed it up with 458 in BBL 12, which is an indication of where he's at in his cricket. He's done pretty well in the Big Bash for the Strikers. He's done pretty well in overseas tournaments. He played in the IPL, I believe, for the Punjab Kings this year, and he did okay. He also is pretty good with the ball, pretty handy with his off-spin. He took 11 wickets in the BBL this year at an economy rate of 7, which is not bad. Obviously played that memorable innings where he scored 100 not out against the Hobart Hurricanes in that record-breaking run chase in the BBL at the Adelaide Oval to get the strikers over the line, which was incredible hitting from Matt Short. So he deserves his call up to the squad. You've also got Spencer Johnson, who's come from nowhere. He's fast, he's quick, he's tall, he's left arm, he's got that variation, he's got pace. And Spencer Johnson has been plagued with injuries over his career. He's from South Australia. He's done pretty well for South Australia last summer in terms of Sheffield Shield cricket. He's taken some wickets in the Shield. He's taken some wickets in the domestic one-day tournament in Australia. And he's also done well in the Big Bash. That's where he really announced himself last season. He took 9 wickets for the Brisbane Heat, and he's done well in overseas tournaments. He's played in the 100 recently, which is ongoing in England. He took 3 for 1 in one spell for the Oval Invincibles. So Spencer Johnson has deserved his call up to the T20 squad. Then you've got Aaron Hardie. He's a pretty good all-rounder from the West in Western Australia. In the Big Bash last year, scored 460 runs, took 5 wickets for the Perth Scorchers. So he deserves his opportunity in the T20 squad. He's done well for Australia A as well in the past. So good opportunity for these new players in Short, Johnson and Hardie to prove to the selectors and prove to the world that they are capable of playing at this level. And with the T20 squad, most of them, nearly all of them, in fact, have played in the IPL at some point. So they've got that experience in playing in T20 cricket, and certainly got that experience in T20 cricket. So as I mentioned, basically all of them have played in the IPL just about. Some of them haven't, but basically nearly all of them have played in the IPL or have played in franchise cricket around the world at least. So they've got that experience. Mitchell Marsh is the new captain. He's captain in the BBL for the Scorchers in the past. He's captain WA, Western Australia, in domestic cricket in all formats. And it will be interesting to see how he goes as leader, Mitchell Marsh. I think the Australian team speak highly of Marsh. They spoke highly of him in the Ashes series recently. They said he's a good team man. He's good to have in the group. And he has captained cricket before, as I mentioned. He's also captained Australia before, and that was under 19 level. I think that was in the 2012 under 19 World Cup, which was in Australia. So he's definitely got experience captaining Australia internationally in terms of the under 19 stuff. So I think he'll do well as captain. I think he'll get the best out of the team, and I think he'll get the best out of himself. He's in good format over the last little period, Marsh. Coming back into the test side in the Ashes, he's done pretty well. So I think he'll do well in this tour of South Africa, going into the World Cup in India as well. As I mentioned, this T20 squad, as I mentioned, is an eye to the future, but it's also an eye to the T20 World Cup next year in South Africa. Let me say that again. The T20 World Cup in the Caribbean in the USA in 2024, I should say. So the squad that Australia have selected, they want to try players out. They want to see what Matt Short, Spencer Johnson, Aaron Hardie, give them experience at international level to see what they can do. And hopefully they'll probably be a part of Australia's plans in the T20 World Cup next year in the Caribbean in the USA. If we have to be honest, Australia's campaign in the T20 World Cup at home was pretty poor. They could have done better. So it's an opportunity for those players and sort of an eye to the future as well and beyond to see what they can do in T20 cricket. So it's definitely a new sort of transition phase for Australia in T20 cricket, which is exciting. And hopefully it will bring success for Australia. So that's the T20 squad. The ODI squad, let's talk about that. The squad that Australia have selected, it's pretty much their provisional Cricket World Cup squad for India. So the squad they've selected for the tour of South Africa, Marsh, Abbott, Ashton Agar, Carey, Cummins, Ellis, Green, Hardie, Hazelwood, Head, Inglis, Johnson, Labuschagne, Maxwell, Sanger, Storness, Warner, and Zampa. Obviously, Australia's ODI squad, as I mentioned, is the provisional Cricket World Cup squad for India. Now, you would think that most of the core group of players in this squad will probably play in the World Cup in India. Some of them will miss out. As I mentioned, you're only allowed to have 15 players for a Cricket World Cup squad. The squad is more than 15, so some players will have to miss out. Obviously, no Cummins, no Smith, no Stark. They're missing because of injury. And that's opened the door for some players like Aaron Hardy and Tanveer Sangha. They've been drafted into the squad. It's an opportunity for them with Cummins and Stark and Smith out. You need opportunities. And I think they'll get some opportunities on this tour of South Africa. Both of them are very good players. Sangha, a very good leg spinner. Didn't play much last summer in the Big Bash. He had an injury to his back. Aaron Hardy, as I mentioned, has done pretty well for WA and also in the Big Bash. So it's an opportunity for those two players. I think both of them will fight it out for a World Cup spot in the squad. Or maybe both of them will be in the squad. We'll have to wait and see. But it's an opportunity for them to really show the selectors what they can do. Marnus Labuschagne's an interesting one. He wasn't originally in the squad provisionally for the World Cup for Australia. George Bailey, head selector, said what pretty much cost Marnus Labuschagne a spot in the side was pretty much his inconsistencies. And Marnus he's in a sort of interesting phase in his career at the moment, Marnus. He didn't do well in the Ashes recently. And in one-day cricket, he's been a bit patchy, been a bit inconsistent. He hasn't really delivered in one-day cricket. He's scored a few half-centuries, but not on a consistent basis. So that's why he wasn't selected originally in the squad for Australia, for their Cricket World Cup squad for India. But he gets a chance. The reason he's back into the squad is because of Steve Smith missing out because of an injury. And Marnus Labuschagne has good memories of playing in South Africa. He was a part of the ODI squad in the tour in 2020. And in the final game of the series, there was only a 3-game series back then, he scored 100 at Potchefstroom, which was 108. And obviously it was a great story at the time. Marnus Labuschagne, originally from South Africa, immigrated to Australia with his family, now plays for Australia, but South Africa is the country that he was born in. So it was a good story at the time when he scored that 100. But since then, Marnus hasn't really done well in one-day cricket. His numbers in one-day cricket compared to list A cricket, for those who don't know what list A cricket is, it's pretty much one-day cricket, but domestically, so we call it list A. His numbers are very similar in terms of his average and how many runs he scored and his strike rate. But it's an opportunity for Marnus to prove his case and to really take on the feedback from the selectors and what George Bailey said. I think Marnus won't probably be in the squad anyway for the World Cup. I think it's usually an indication if you weren't picked originally, then I don't think the selectors will probably think about him in India. That's just the way I see it. And I think that's just the way everyone sees it, I think he knows that, you know, if there's an injury or some sort of thing that happens, he may be called upon as a reserve, which is pretty handy to have an extra batter in the squad. So he may be a reserve. If, unfortunately, one of the batters gets an injury in India during the World Cup, he may be called upon as a reserve. But I don't see Marnus being in the 15-player squad for the World Cup in India. But it's an opportunity for him in this series to see what he can do, take on the feedback and what he can do to get better. I think this is good preparation for Australia. Australia, they have a pretty good squad. It's a strong squad, even though there's no Cummins, Stark and Smith playing in this series, but it's a pretty strong squad. They've got some good players. They've played with each other for a very long time. Some World Cup winners in that squad. You've got Mitchell Marsh, Pat Cummins, obviously Smith, Warner, Maxwell, Hazelwood. They've all won the World Cup. That was back in 2015. So you've got experience there in terms of World Cup winners in this side. So yeah, it is a pretty good squad, and I think they will do well in this series against South Africa. And Australia have done well in one-day cricket over the last few months. They've won series, they've won some games. The last series they played in one-day cricket was against India, And that was after the Test series early this year in March. And they won that series 2-1. And that will give them tremendous confidence going into the World Cup in India, obviously. And obviously, after this tour of South Africa, Australia will head to India. They will play three ODIs against India before the World Cup starts in October, November. So Australia have a lot of preparation to do. They want to get their processes right and get their structures right. That being said, Australia, pretty good squad, strong squad. I think they'll do well. There's a lot of opportunities for new players in both sides and both squads to showcase what they can do, which is very exciting. So I think for Australia, they should be happy with the squad that they've selected for both the formats, T20s and ODIs for this tour of South Africa. And I think all the players will be chomping at the bit to see what they can do and hopefully prove their case for World Cup selection in that squad of 15. We shall see what happens as the series progresses over the next few weeks in South Africa. Right, so we come to that point of the episode where we give our predictions for the series. And let's do that. Series predictions for the T20 and ODI series against South Africa and Australia. Let's predict who's going to win both series, leading run scorer, leading wicket taker, etc. Now, the last time South Africa and Australia played against each other in South Africa was back in 2020, so it's 3 years ago now. In 2020, they played 3 ODIs and 3 T20s. South Africa won the T20 series 2-1 in the best of 3. I think people would remember in that series, Ashton Agar got a hat-trick and got 5 wickets. I think that was in the first game of the series, where Australia won their only game of that series. Obviously, the ODI series, South Africa won 3-0 in 3. So that's what happened in 2020 when the teams both played in South Africa. Now, the T20 series, let's predict who's going to win that. It could go either way. In T20 cricket, it could go either way. Australia may win, South Africa may win. Obviously, new players trying to showcase their skills, and obviously both teams have selected squads that are sort of an eye to the World Cup, T20 World Cup next year in Caribbean and the USA, but also a bit of future planning for Australia in particular with their squad. I've gone with Australia to win, probably 2-1. You would think that Australia should do enough to get over the line. Leading run scorer, I think Mitchell Marsh. I think Mitchell Marsh as captain will want to do well. He's in good touch with the bat. I think he will be the leading run scorer in the T20 series. Leading wicket taker, I'm going to go with Adam Zampa. He does well in T20 cricket, so I think he'll be the leading wicket taker. So that's the T20 series. The ODI series, both teams preparing for the World Cup, obviously, in India in a couple of months' time. Australia, you would think, have the stronger team on paper compared to South Africa. But with that being said, don't underestimate South Africa. They can cause a few problems for Australia in this series. So you would think that Australia should win the series, but South Africa, they'll be hoping to try and test themselves and hopefully get some victories in this series. With that being said, I've gone with Australia 3-2. I think Australia are the stronger team. South Africa may win a couple of games here and there. You never know. Australia may try different players and all that stuff and rotate. So I think Australia probably to win 3-2. I think they're the strongest team. Don't underestimate South Africa. They may cause some problems for Australia, as I mentioned. So Australia 3-2 to win the ODI series. Leading run scorer, I've gone with Mitchell Marsh again. I think being captain of both the T20 and ODI formats in this series of South Africa, in this tour, it's going to be important for him to stand up and lead from the front. So I've gone with him again as leading run scorer in the ODIs. Leading wicket taker, we've got some very good bowlers on both sides. I've gone with Anrich Nortje. Maybe he could be the leading wicket taker of the series. We shall see. It's only a prediction, but that's the ODI series in terms of our predictions. So if you're listening to this episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel, do let us know your predictions in the comments section. Who will win the T20 and ODI series, leading run scorer, leading wicket taker? Do let us know in the comments section of this episode. My final thoughts on this T20 and ODI series against South Africa and Australia to finish off our series preview today. It should be a very good couple of series, I think. I think both teams have good players in all formats in the world, very talented, very skilled. And I think we're going to have some very competitive series, I think. It's definitely going to be an exciting series, opportunity for players to show the world what they can do. And that's what you want to do as a player. Also, players on both sides will be fighting for spots in the World Cup squads for the respected teams. So we may see some very entertaining cricket in the T20 and ODI formats of this series. So we shall see what happens over the 3 T20s and 5 ODIs. But South Africa and Australia, they have a very good rivalry over the years. And we've seen that over the years. As we know, they've played some very good cricket over the years against each other. So it'll be no different in 2023 in this tour in 2023 between both countries. So it's going to be a very interesting couple of series, that's for sure. Thanks, everyone, for listening or watching our preview of the South Africa and Australia T20 and ODI series. I hope you enjoyed it. Before we go, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast YouTube channel. It's a very simple thing to do. All you need to do is click the subscribe button and click the notification bell. So you don't miss out on the episodes that we post on the podcast, our live streams, and especially when we're interviewing special guests. So you don't want to miss out on that. So click the bell so you don't miss out on that. And also subscribe. Subscribe to the podcast as well. It really does help us out. Also, make sure you follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. We're also on Facebook as well. So give us a like on our Facebook page as well. And the podcast is available on Anchor, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts for you to listen. Once again, thanks everyone for listening. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.